All right, guys. So perfect. Okay, so I wanted to bring this topic in. We're starting to head towards, some quality work towards the race season. And I know the race season's a little ways off, and we've got lots of base stuff to do and work to do to be ready for it. But this is the time that we really want to start practicing that nutrition, dialing in on it. And I really want to check in with people where their nutrition is at for racing and get some ideas. Be surprised, so I know I tell you a lot. I know I tell you sort of repetitively. I'm sure I sound like Charlie Brown's teacher sometimes, and it's in one ear out the other. Like I say the same thing over and over again. So it's good, but I'd be surprised sometimes when I hear back in a conversation what athletes are actually using in their training and racing. And I wanted to get on top of that and ahead of that before the race season actually hits. So we get a good chance to, you can fiddle with it, you can try new things, you can practice it, you can come forward and say like, hey, actually I'm using this and it's working really well, or I'm having these issues. Because now's the time to really, play around with that stuff and figure out like different products you might want to use, different setups, all that kind of stuff. What's working, what's not, even as far as if you're having some kind of medical issue that is, conflicting with your nutrition and we need to get that sorted out. I really wanted to get ahead of it now while it's only February before we hit those spring races. So I know that some of you actually work with dietitians and nutritionists, which I think is fantastic. I am not a registered dietitian. I can only offer my experience and what I know and what I've learned over the years. And then when it gets to a level where we feel like we need to bring an expert in, you can always reach out to me. I have like you might have someone in your area that you work with that is really good, or if not, you can reach out to me, and I have really good connections that I trust and I know that are, can take it to that next level and really, really dial things in. If you're coming to the Tucson camp, we actually, one of those people, Erin Green, she's going to be one of the coaches on the camp. And I coached her through her last 2 years of her professional career. She is a registered dietitian who used to work in hospitals and does sports nutrition. She's worked with college teams and in a couple of universities. So she's going to be working with us through camp, doing a little talk and helping people with nutrition through camp as well. So hopefully we'll get some videos with her and some good insight. So not only does she really get our sport, but she was also racing full-time as a professional while working as a dietitian in a hospital full-time. So she knows how to really, yeah, Mike, I saw your eyes. And she was racing and placing top 5 in the women's races overall. So she really knows how to bust her ass and get the details right so that she could perform well. So she's a good resource for us, and I know her well and trust her, so we can use her. But yeah, so some of the things that I wanted to touch on, we've also, Danny, you had the pleasure many years ago, we used to do a camp and actually in Bloomington, and we had a really good dietitian there. I have some good, and I've sent some of it, that slide presentation to some of you. Let's see, I'm gonna share my screen here for a second. I think. Well, maybe not. Anyways, I'll put it in the chat. There is a really good slide. I'll put it in the chat here for us while we're going, or I'll email it in our WhatsApp chat. A lot of you've seen it before. It's a really good detailed slide presentation that is something to reference to throughout the year. It's very long, and I'm not going to go through her presentation for you, but I will give it to you, as well as I will post in the chat a couple articles I've done on, just simple thoughts of things that I've done in the past, things to take into consideration, that kind of stuff when you're talking about nutrition. So specifically, we want to talk today about not your day-to-day nutrition, but your race nutrition and what you're doing in your, actual races while you're racing, okay? And the things we want to really look at, I'm going to run through some of, just real quickly, bullet point, the thoughts that I want to go through. And I'm going to also ask you guys to share some of the things that you're possibly doing or looking into. I know that We've got some people doing really good work. Ginny, you're one of them with having, this is a real common thing with triathletes and runners is runners trots, and we do a lot of work with that. You've got some good insight that we've shared back and forth with Nicole, so we're going to share on that. And Jim, I know you have a lot of interest. You've had some pretty heavy duty GI distress that's limited your racing. So I really want to cover talking about, the importance of how we fuel when we race. And what I mean by that is it being frequent and often, and what that means. There is times when athletes try to super concentrate their fueling. And in my experience, when I've tried that myself, or I've seen athletes try that, that can result in quite a bit of GI distress for people. So we'll talk about the comparisons of that. How much it can be overlooked on how much hydration you need with your calories. So when you're taking in calories and you're taking in, especially when we talk about taking in solid calories, how much actual hydration we need for our GI to be able to process that and be able to use that fuel. We want to talk a little bit, and all of these we'll talk a little bit quickly on, is the difference between hot and cold, what your nutrition might look like in racing versus when it's hot out, when it's cold out, and practicing and discovering what kind of nutrition works for you when you're racing under stress, right? Under intensity. It's one thing to absorb something when you're going easy, and it's another thing to do it under race stress and under a race intensity. So that's really important. I also want to really quickly cover, I get a lot of questions about all the other stuff. I put it in parentheses, other stuff. In other words, it's really tempting with all the products out there to get carried away with putting all these other things in your bottles. Protein, BCAAs, the laundry list is forever. And I'll share with you if anyone has experience with that stuff, but my general overriding opinion on that is the more complicated you make it, the higher risk of GI distress there is, right? Especially under intensity and in difficult races and hot races. The main thing you have to take into consideration when you're a triathlete is that, when you're just riding the bike or you're a bike racer, your body can handle nutrition a lot differently than when we have to run, right? Like we all know that, right? It's like, well, that worked just on the bike. And when I do bike races or I do bike events, or when I just focused on bike training, man, my gut is made of steel. You can handle anything. You can eat almost anything out there and be okay, depending on how hard you're going. But as soon as we put those runners on and we have to start running, that's typically when the GI distress pops up for a lot of people, when they run into problems. So really making sure that that's the main thing that you take into account when we talk about nutrition. We'll talk a little bit about the different sugars of what works for people and what doesn't, looking at that first ingredient of the product that you use and what might work for you or not. There's some of them, like the super scratch stuff, that is, multidextrin based. It's a slower burning sugar. It's the first ingredient in, and some people's bodies don't absorb that very well, and it gives them a lot of gas. And some people it works really well for. So understanding which of the sugars and balance of sugars work best for you, and really paying attention to your product that you use. What are the sugars that are listed first, right? So if it's sucrose, fructose, if it's multidextrin, what is the primary base of the product that you're using, and how does that work for you? We're going to talk we'll also really briefly cover overfueling and underfueling, right? And that is going to go in line with that frequently, how frequent and often philosophy that I like, and how I feel that works much better than the concentrated fueling. So when there's a big push out there now, you see it with a lot of the pros and with the bike race teams in really heavy, you can train your gut and really heavy loading as far as how much to take in. There is a point where when you take in too much, your body just can't absorb it and it will cause GI distress. And specifically understanding whether using liquids or like liquid or solids are going to work for you, and what does that specifically mean. And then there is the other extreme that I see where people are really underfueling for their event. If you're, typically the body can handle You know, if you look at it, it's like 300 calories per hour is typically what a person's body can absorb. And that's going to fluctuate on your size and your intensity and your fitness level based on, you know, where that pushes up to and where it might be just slightly under. So we can look at that a little bit as well. Salt and caffeine, those are two things to talk about a little bit too, right? How do we carry it all? Where the heck do we put all this stuff, right? It can be in a long race, like I got all this stuff. How do I actually carry it? I cover that a little bit in some of my articles, but we can touch on that really quickly, as well as I want to make sure and touch base with everyone. This is the time of year, once you're playing with these nutrition plans for your races, it's really, really key to practice it in the environment you're going to be racing. In other words, when you're outside on your bikes, can you reach down and grab your bottle? Can you reach back and grab the bottles behind you? Can you, wherever you're carrying your gels or your chews and that kind of stuff, can you actually get it out of the packet? Or are you, you know, do you know that you can reach it, you can get it, and you can get it into your body? In windy conditions with the equipment that you use, whether you're using aero wheels, aero bars, all of that kind of stuff. If you've got really deep dish rims and it's a really windy race, you need to know and be practiced that you can still get your nutrition, because no matter how aero you are, if you don't fuel yourself and you bonk, we're not going to be very fast, right? So we need to make sure that we understand that early on in the season and that we're practicing that stuff and have a really good understanding of it. So I'm gonna, before I start touching a little bit deeper on those topics, is there anything outside of that that anyone feels that I've, you know, obviously there's gonna be things I miss because this is a massive topic. And I would like, when we're done this call, for there to be a continuing conversation in our group WhatsApp. If people want to share things, they want to ask questions, those kinds of things. I think it's such a huge part of our success in endurance sports. You've got to be able to fuel well to race well. And it also changes depending on your fitness level, right? So early season, when your fitness might be, you know, we build the fitness through the year, it might be a little lower. You need different amounts. Then as you get fitter and fitter, it might change on how much you need. So having that knowledge and the ability to adapt your nutrition as you go, or maybe even possibly in a race on the fly, so that you are able to, you know, able to access all the fitness that you built in a race, because we all know that it doesn't matter how fit you are and how well prepared you are and how mentally strong you are and how determined you are. If we don't get that nutrition piece right, it falls apart. It can make for a really painful day out on any of our endurance events, right? Christina has even another element of when she's doing her open water swim races. That's a huge part of even just understanding. We talk about practicing under conditions and elements. She's got to get a feed off of a boat, and it's got to be, you know, sent out to her from the top of a boat on a string, and she's got to be able to get it, eat it in the water, and know that she can keep swimming, and even in the dark. So super important to understand what your body can take in and practice it under conditions. So that's why we're doing that this time of year. Is there anything really before I ask some people some questions and start going through these a little deeper, that they want to bring up at this point?
I have a question for you, Marilyn. And all things being equal, as far as someone's ability to tolerate whatever it is they're taking in, is there an advantage to eating more solid things versus gels or infinite or whatever? I mean, is there, like, I'm pretty lucky in that I have pretty strong stomach and nothing really ever causes me a lot of GI stress. Maybe it's because I go too slow. but is there any advantage to eating something more solid versus just gels?
So that's a great question, Jenny. And the big thing around that is it really depends on what the solid is, how hot the race is, and the intensity of your race effort. So those things really matter. If you're racing at quite a high intensity, or the conditions are hot, then if you're eating a lot of solids, sometimes when we hit later in the day, that can really be a big problem as far as GI distress. Like that can be, so that if it's a cold race and you know that you're going to be racing, maybe the race is a really, really long one, and you know that your intensity is going to be a bit lower early on in the day with enough fluids, including solids, can be helpful for a person, right? And it depends on the type of solid. The things we really want to stay away from when we're racing are nuts, oat-based stuff, like really heavy, hard to digest, fibrous, fat type things within bars. So like some of those bars that we can use in training, we might not necessarily be able to use in racing. You're better off, like I lean towards bananas because that will be easily digested, right? Or just straight up plain chocolate, like a Hershey's bar. You can, again, it's important to know how to carry it. You think, well, a Hershey's bar, isn't that just going to melt everywhere? But if you break them into the squares, wrap them in tin foil, freeze them the night before, and put them in like your bento box or something like that. I've used that exact thing in as hot a race as Texas. And when I unwrap them, they're not melted. So if it's, things like pure chocolate, bananas, those kinds of solids, they can be really helpful. If it's really, really heavy nut-based or protein-based or really heavy fiber type based, that can cause a lot of GI stress later on in the race. Kirsten, you have your hand up. Let's go ahead and what do you have to share there with that? I know that Kirsten's actually the reason that prompted this meeting, because we had an independent meeting of her. She works with a specific dietitian, and it surprised me some of the things that she was doing that I wasn't aware of, and it came up, and we were able to sort through them. So I really wanted to check in with everyone after we had that conversation. So
yeah. Yeah. So what she means by things I was doing means like things I was not doing. So basically how like totally wrong my feeling was before I started working with a nutritionist, which I just started doing so that Marilyn and I had a conversation right after that, and Marilyn was like, "Whoa, you weren't doing all these things for the last year." So this is great. I'm really glad you're doing this now. Can you go through some point during your talk about the amino acids thing? I know you and I talked about it, but it seems to be like kind of a craze or a newish thing that people are getting in during races, short races and long races. So I'm just not really sure about that. So if you can cover a little bit of the getting the amino acids in during training and racing.
Yeah, well, what we talked about there mostly, and this, we can share back and forth about our conversation with that, is and I touched on it briefly, and that's one of the points I brought up. So this is a good time to touch on that point, is all the other things, right? So there's a lot of push for extra things that can be helpful, and I feel like they are helpful when we train. When you train, adding that stuff in can have a real positive effect. And I'm not saying that when you race, it couldn't have a positive effect. However, my experience has been, for myself when racing and with coaching hundreds of athletes over the last 20 years, as soon as we start adding those extra things into a race plan, when you're under stress and you're at race intensity, anything extra like that can lead to GI distress. And so in my experience, it's been that the cleaner and the simpler you can keep your race nutrition plan, especially those high intensity and high stress race environments, the better your GI is going to be. So adding things like protein, there's a lot of drinks that have the protein mix in them. And one mistake you'll see is, let's say you're in an Ironman and you've got protein in your bottles and you think, well, that's my mix, and I put it in special needs, and then you hand it off in the morning and it sits out on the pavement for hours in the heat. And then you pick that up and you digest it. Well, everyone's already smiling, knowing what the answer to that is. It probably spoiled, right? And now you're drinking spoiled protein because it was sitting out on the highway, especially a place like Kona or Texas or any of these hot, a lot of races are hot now. And then you end up throwing up and feeling really sick, or your stomach shuts down. Well, you ingested something that went rotten, right? So you really want to make sure that things, if you're going to use things like amino acids, use it a lot in training, use it in your key sessions, use it under stress, use it out, out actually in in the conditions that you're going to be racing in, and really be sure that you don't have any GI distress from it. Amino acids, there's probably less likely than like something like protein. I would just highly recommend you stay away from that when racing. I don't see a problem with it when you're training, but when you're racing, I'd stay away from it. Same thing with like the nut bars, like, you know, the heavy base, like Cliff bars and the homemade bars and the nut butter bars, that stuff. Training, okay, you're probably going to get away with that. But when it comes to racing, I would stay away from that stuff and keep it really simple. In one of the articles I wrote, I really say, like, when it hits your mouth and you imagine it going in your stomach, it becomes liquid as quickly as possible. And then you're backing that up with fluids. So another mistake that people make is that they're taking in all of these calories, but they're not backing it up with enough fluids to properly digest it. So that's really key. So I have a rule of thumb: if I'm running up to an aid station on a run, you know, I have my gel as I'm running up to it. I grab a cup of water, drink the cup of water. If I need a little bit of, if it's later in the race, Coke, something like that, grab a Coke or a Gatorade, another water on the exit. And you always, you know, you pinch those cups so that as you're running, you can have them. And so you had your fuel and you backed it up with fluids right through, and then you carry on. Now, some of you might be running with things like fuel belts or handheld fluids, or even like the, you know, the nice ones now that come with a, I don't know, I can't remember the name of it, but you guys know what I mean. Like you can carry a lot of fluid with you. So you have the advantage that you just need to have your nutrition and you can sip on the fluids whenever you want. So, but it's important that when you have those, you know, doses of calories, that you back it up with enough fluids. And to go back to your point, there is anything that you're going to have that's outside of sugar, salt, and water, you really, really want to make sure that your body digests it under stress and in the conditions that you're going to be racing in. Right? So I went going through it a little bit here, back to the top of the list. In hot races, obviously that's going to be, and I'm stating some of the things that, again, I know I sound like Charlie Brown teachers, but it's good to revisit them. When it's a hotter race, obviously we need to increase the fluids. And if you're interested at all, this is the time of year that you want to do things like sweat tests, or start tracking your fluid loss so that you get a really good idea of, hey, how much fluid do I lose when I'm in heat? Maybe even do, if you're in a cold place right now and you know you've got a hot race coming up, you do some of those sessions inside with no fan on, your harder, longer sessions. You weigh yourself before, you track how many bottles you drank during that session, you weigh yourself after. Do that for an extended period of time, many, many sessions, and start to get a really good feel. How much fluid am I really losing when I'm doing these sessions? Right? If you're able to be in good conditions where you're outside, same thing. Or if you're coming to camp every day, you can track, like, how much am I actually drinking and how much am I actually losing? You can take it one step further and actually get a test done where you can dial in exactly what your hydration needs are. So this is the time of year to look at that stuff. And then when it's hot, we know we need to increase our sodium, right? So how much sodium I lose. There are salty sweaters, and there are people who maybe they sweat a lot, they need to replenish their fluids, but they don't actually need that much sodium. So this is a good time of year if you want to get some kind of test done to figure that stuff out. Or you can just play around with it. Hey, am I really salty afterwards? Do I get blurry vision? Do I have, you know, I know that I'm taking in enough calories and enough fluids, but I still feel really blurry-eyed. That could be a sodium issue. So now's the time of year that you want to be playing with that and have a really good understanding. When I raced personally, usually the sodium, it's like somewhere between 300 an hour up to the most I've seen it is 1,200 milligrams an hour. I was right around 1,000 milligrams an hour when I raced Ironman, which is quite a lot. So we go back to that, how am I actually going to get that much in, right? So if for me at 1,000 milligrams an hour to fiddle around and try and digest that many tablets, salt tablets, was almost impossible. So I found products that provided that. And there's a lot of great products out there now that you can do that. Arma makes a really good sodium replacement product. We're going to get to try that at camp. The Right Stuff I've worked with for years. So if your heavy salty sweater needs a lot of sodium, that's a really good product. There's lots of good ones out there you can play around with. So the hotter races, more fluids, check in, start testing now how much you lose, increasing the sodium if you need it. The hotter it is, the more liquid the type of calories you need. In other words, the chocolate, the bananas, the gels, the chews, the sports drink, where it's really, really easy digested. The hotter it is, the more important that is. The colder races and early season, everybody tends to need more calories. And I will tell you, actually, for the ladies out there, when we're in our menstrual cycle, if you're racing and you have your period, you tend to need more calories than when you're not. So that's an adjustment as well. So any of the ladies that run into where they're, you know, it's a race day, crap, this has come up. And I'll hear more often than not, oh, I bonked, even though I use the same calories I always do. You tend to need a little bit more calories when you're racing on your period than when you don't. So cold weather, you definitely need to increase your calories. Early season, you need to increase your calories. And for the ladies, when you're on your menstrual cycle, you need to increase your calories, okay? You'll likely feel like you don't need as much fluids, but you still do need a lot of fluids while you're racing in the cold. So the tendency is you get off your bike in a colder race and holy man, I've only drank like half of one of my bottles. Really make sure that you practice when it's cold, that you continue to get the amount of fluids that you need. Okay, that's really important. You might need to back off the amount of sodium that you use. So the amount of sodium that you're using in a hot race versus a cold race is going to be significantly different. So make sure you're checking in with that and really understand what that looks like. And again, the reason we're touching on this now, because this is where you can take all these notes and then we can go away and like, this will be your opportunity to formulate your plan and then try it and practice it and then fiddle with it, and make adjustments to it and then come back to it. And everyone, there's so many great products out there now. Everyone's going to be using something a little different that works for them. And now's the time to experiment with that. Whatever that product is that works for you. But with the fundamental basis, knowing, with these rules of thumb, this is what I'm going to be revolving around, right? If it's hot, if it's a long race, how much is the intensity, solids versus liquids, what do I need, that kind of thing. Yeah, and very, very important as you're practicing this stuff that you practice it on your bricks. Because again, remember what necessarily works just when we ride our bike, because you could have a really long, hard bike session and practice your fueling and think this works great, but you've never actually done it and then run off and used it when you have to run off the bike. And I mean the amount and everything, right? Because then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I'm doubled over and that actually was a little bit too much or not quite the right thing based on that I have to run and I've got this GI distress. Or it might be, oh wow, I have to back it up with a run and I need more than what I thought to be able to feel good on the run. Right. And that's typically more often what happens is that we underfuel the bike just a little bit and we can get away with a bike session. But if we had to run 2 hours off the bike, right, we need to be thinking about that when we're on our bikes. Am I used to and practice getting the amount of calories that I need? And for most of us, if there's a range, that's going to be somewhere. For smaller women, it might be somewhere around that 200, 250 calories an hour, right? That's not always, right? There are some small women who rip through a ton of calories and sugar at the intensity that they go at, and they need up to 400 calories an hour. But there are some where if they took that much in, it would just cause a lot of GI distress. So it would be, closer to 200, 250 per hour. And that's where they're going to feel comfortable. So it depends. And it depends on what you train on. Same with the men. The men are probably likely going to be 300 up to 400. There are some pros out there that have had conversations, male pros who are going really hard that are trying to get in about 600 calories an hour. I don't recommend that for any of you. I think that recipe is pretty risky, and a lot of them are risking pretty high GI distress and end up with pretty high GI distress at some point, but they're racing so hard that they're willing to take that risk that it might give them a boost. I don't recommend that. I think that's too much and it's too high risk. So I would cap it out at around 400 if you're going to be on the higher calorie side. Play with that for a while, get comfortable with that. And if you feel good around there, then we can talk individually about that. The little and often is super important, guys. So that, where think about it, some of you need to set a timer, but that once you're going and you're racing, it should be the idea of that steady, think about your blood sugar just staying stable all day. Little and often is always the way to go. If we get behind and then we try and bomb a whole bunch of calories in you, and then you try and, troubleshoot it with enough fluids, those types of things, and they come up. I know they come up. I mean, I've made some epic mistakes in races that you guys would laugh your butts off, where, I mean, I was doubled over and trying to finish a race looking like a T running down the running down the road. So, the thing that I have found to be the most successful is that steady, just little and often. And you'll hear people say things like, well, I heavy fueled the bike, so therefore I then didn't need to really fuel the run, right? And that is a myth and a massive, massive mistake. You want a little and often on the bike, so we never run into that GI distress. It might be a little bit more, it's likely to be a little bit more than what you're going to tolerate on the run. So let's say you're someone who takes in 300 calories an hour on the bike, depending on if it's hot or not, 1 to 2 bottles on the bike of fluids to back that up. And then that might get backed off onto the run, where every 15 to 25 minutes, you're having something like 80 to 100 calories. That might be a gel and a sports drink as you go through an aid station, backed up with fluids, right? So it might be backed off just a little bit on the run, depending on what you can handle. Some pro tips on the run: if later in the race, especially for the people doing Ironmans, when inevitably your stomach starts to kind of go late in these really, really long races, it's just had enough and it starts to get finicky. Couple little pro tips: if you get those, even in half Ironmans, if you're someone who gets that a little bit later in the race, that last quarter, go to like a CVS or Walgreens, and those glucose tablets, or even just Jolly Ranchers, that is something that you can pop in your mouth late in the race. It's not calories. It doesn't replace calories. There's like no calories in that, but it will stabilize your blood sugar enough if your stomach's gone south, and you back that up with fluids as you're going, that it can keep you going as an emergency button, right? So if you're like, holy man, it's the back half of the race and I just can't get anything down anymore, and you're relying on, rather than just absolutely nothing, having those, I used to always have a little packet of glucose tablets, and if I needed them, I could pop them in my mouth. As one dissolves, have the next one, or you could just pop a Jolly Rancher in your mouth and have it there. And it can be something that can save you in an emergency. So that's a little pro tip you're not going to find anywhere on the internet. Yeah, so I think the last thing that I know I've sort of already said this before I open it up and ask some more questions from people, is, really there is the possibility to train your gut. So if you're someone who struggles and you're on the lower end of calories and you need to start bumping them up so that you're not bonking as much later in the race, you can train your gut under stress. And that is even something I used to do, where I would be doing my hard runs. Let's say I had a hard track run, and maybe it was like 6 by 1 mile on the track at threshold. I would train my gut under stress. So I would have like a bottle that was, the calories that I needed and the fluids, and in between each rep, have enough of those calories that it's quite uncomfortable, and you have to learn how to run hard or bike hard with a little bit of stomach discomfort, and start teaching your body to absorb those calories and handle that under stress. Really common mistake people make is they wait until like 3 weeks before their race, and then they start, trying to fiddle just a little bit with the race nutrition, and then they go race and they do it and they go, I don't know why that didn't work, and I didn't feel very good. So you want to, just like we train the swim, bike, and run, you want to be training your gut to handle what it is that you're going to be using and under stress, so that by the time you get there, you can really handle it. Ginny, I would like for you to share a little bit. So I know some of us, you could do everything right and still end up with the runner's trots. and even on a daily basis. And I will also, Ginny knows this, I struggled with that as well. I had to plan every run I ever did when I was racing around toilet blocks. My coach, Scott Molina, was exactly the same. We used to joke about like making sure you had a little bit of TP in a baggie for every run you went on. And so that is a really common thing. One thing that helped me with that, another pro tip, was to have Metamucil every single night. And if I had Metamucil every single night, then that helped with the daily running trots. That has nothing to do with race nutrition, but it helped with that. But Jenny, you have had some good advice, and it's helping a little bit, just some things on managing that a bit. This is a little outside of the race nutrition, but I know something that people struggle with and might be helpful to share on this call. Oh, we can't hear you.
There
we go.
Really, I mean, I could try every single different thing to eat the night before, the morning of, or whatever, to see if it would make a difference, and nothing made a difference. But I've tried now to go gluten-free, which just doesn't irritate my stomach as much. And I finally have gone back to eating more carbs, like I should, to be fueled, because I tried there for a while and my stomach didn't hurt when I cut out a lot of the carbs, but I didn't have the energy that I needed. I'm interested to see, just because over December and then January running like I normally would outside, I haven't been able to do that as much just because of the weather here and getting a cold and things like that. So I still want to see, but I'm as well open for more suggestions if anybody has them. But I've gone through every
bit about the probiotics and stuff, though, that we share. That's more, I think, a important part of the share here.
Okay. I am taking probiotics each day, and I do take a digestive enzyme when I eat a meal, because that just sort of helped to settle my stomach. So it had gotten to the point where my stomach was kind of hurting no matter whether I was running or not, but it was just worse when I ran, because I would be trying to hit the bathroom or the woods or anywhere. So I'm trying all that.
Can you talk about the timing, what you did, what you changed in the timing of the carbs? Like, what kind of carbs did you add, and then like, did you add it for lunch and then dinner? And can you share the type of probiotics that you're taking?
Yes. The carbs I would try to eat the night before, and then usually the morning of a run, if it's not real long, I may not eat, but if it is, I might try to eat a bagel with some almond butter or something on it. And they do make gluten-free bagels, or if you like those or not, but anyway, that. And then the probiotics, I've really tried a couple of different ones, and they say not to get hooked on one strain, to change it about so that you're not taking the same thing all the time. So I went on Amazon and looked at the most popular ones and got some of those. Let me grab this box. And also, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Dr. Gundry or Dr. Berg. I've tried paying attention to all those doctors, but they have some good probiotics, and I've tried those. I don't have the other one that I just finished, but the digestive enzymes, you can get just about any kind, and try that and see if that helps. But it's not a guaranteed thing yet. I'm still working on it. But,
yeah, and sometimes, with I appreciate all that, Jenny, and it is, it's one of those things that it might not ever completely go away with running. However, I do think that, the things that you're doing are helpful. And I will say, the most helpful thing that I did with that was having Metamucil every single night, or any kind of psyllium husk, that kind of thing, but having that every single night, that really seemed to help clear up the problem a lot for me. But again, it can be you also want to make sure with your physicians that you're not struggling with anything like, irritable bowel syndrome, or there isn't some kind of medical issue that's going on a little bit
Well,
deeper. If it's
I
something
did do that GI test, and it did show that I had leaky gut. Some doctors believe in that and some don't, but I do think that there's something to it, that my body's not absorbing the nutrition. So
Right.
That's one reason I tried to really start weaning down what I was eating. But when you took the Metamucil, would you take it like the night before you're going to run the next morning and it'd be okay?
It was what made it okay. And I don't know, it's like sort of like everything that was in my intestines, it pulled it out and gave it something to lock onto and pulled it out so that things were cleared out in the morning. And so that then when I ran, it was cleared out, and I didn't have, that was when I had the least problems. Night before race, everything, because that was the main thing that really, really, really helped me. And my dad was a physician, and he was the one that told me that as he saw me struggle with really bad runner's trots. He said, just start taking Metamucil every night. There's better products out there now than Metamucil, but back then that's all there was. And it worked. So, and it was just simply, that wasn't same thing. That wasn't through any kind of sports dietitian or anything. It was just like my dad happened to be a physician, and that was super helpful. So,
Right.
yeah, so something to try as well. All right, I'm going to shift over just a little bit from that. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And you can share more on the WhatsApp with everyone, and people can ping Ginny specifically if they want to ask her a little bit more on that. So I appreciate that. The one last thing I want to touch on before I'm going to actually ask another question of someone is that, when we race, there are some of the hidden things that we don't talk about that much, but they're super important. If you are using anything when you race as far as medications, okay, that needs to be taken into account on what it does to your body as well. So any kind of NSAIDs, Advil, ibuprofen, if you're on any prescription medications, those can have a real impact on you. And in fact, any of those types of Advils or NSAIDs, stuff like that, anti-inflammatories, you're at high risk for hyponatremia. Okay. And hyponatremia, I'll find some good stuff on that as well and post it in the chat. But hyponatremia can also happen if we overdo it on just straight fluids and not enough sodium within your race nutrition while you're racing, especially in long races. And if your intensity is quite a bit lower, if you have low intensity and you're out there for a long time and you overdo it with just straight fluids with not enough sodium, you can go have something called hyponatremia. It can also happen, which can put you in the hospital. It's serious. Okay. Hyponatremia is serious. It can also be a problem if you're taking any kind of anti-inflammatories. So you can do all your nutrition perfectly, and if you're taking an anti-inflammatory while you race, that's a big problem. So if that is you, please let me know, and let's talk about something, something different so that you're not doing that. You can, if you really absolutely need to, use small bits of Tylenol in a race. Okay. And that is different than anti-inflammatories. They're different medications. So if you're dealing with, need to use something like that when you race, some people at the back half of Ironmans, if they, need to use something like that, or even in any long races, half Ironmans, any long race, if that is something that is part of your plan that you're using as a management, Tylenol can be used, and you're not going to run into those same issues. Very, very small amount though. A lot can cause issues as well. For some of the GI distress when racing, I have used and had athletes use Imodium. And depending on the athlete, again, you want to practice it. It can be helpful. So again, that's dependent on the athlete and practicing with it. You do need to back up Imodium with a lot of fluids. Okay, but that is something, like I expressed, I did struggle with the trots when I raced and ran. And so part of my race plan was to have an Imodium 1 hour before the race started, then another one at about 3/4. So for me, 150 kilometers into the bike, I would have another Imodium, and then probably about halfway through the marathon. So, but I backed that up with a lot of fluids, and I practiced it, and I knew it worked for me. So that is something, if you have a lot of GI distress where you're running to the bathroom, if you don't back it up with enough fluids, you can run into another problem where you've got stomach cramps. So you want to make sure you've practiced it, it works for you, that you have enough fluids with it. But for me and several other athletes I know, that, to prevent that runner's trots, that can be a tactic that you can use and can be helpful for some people. So in regards to that. So, race nutrition can be more, there is a lot more to it than just like, what am I eating during? So if there's, any kinds of medications that you're working with a doctor, that kind of stuff, if you're doing everything right and it's practice and you're still running into trouble, take a look at that and make sure that there's not something there that's causing the problems for you or you're struggling with, or it's okay to race on. Make sure that doing really, really long races, whatever medications you might be on, you're okay doing these long races on. All right, Kirsten, I want you to go ahead and share just a little bit of some of the work you've done. One of the most, and this is a common problem, and it's one of the points I said, is the underfueling. I've covered overfueling and the risks of that, but a common problem, the reason I'll have you chat a bit here is because this was part of our conversation, is it's really easy to underfuel and get caught in, especially in tough conditions, right? Like if it's really windy or you're not used to, make sure that the equipment you use, like I suggested, that is equipment that you can handle your bike and get your nutrition. And underfueling can be a real, we know a real problem as far as tapping into your fitness in a race. So share a little bit about what we talked about and what you're going through.
Yeah. So what was happening to me is I was losing it on the second half of the bike in a 70.3. And I just kind of, randomly, because it's somebody that knew somebody work with a nutritionist. And, I said, oh, maybe I'm just, not doing this right. And she looked at everything that I was doing, and it was just like super obvious right away that I just simply was not getting enough in that first half of the bike. And that was because, like Marilyn just said, I was taking in bars with nuts. So all that stuff that you're not really supposed to be doing. So yeah, I was taking in nut bars like almost exclusively. Well, pretty much exclusively. I mean, every once in a while I would have like a Morton's gel or something. And the thing is that I couldn't get them in while I was on the bike. I could get them in on the bike during a training session, but not in a race because they weren't like easily like grabbable. Also, I was chewing them for a long time and I got sick of that. And then with the nutritionist, as she told me, anything that has a decent amount of fats in it, like the nuts, doesn't digest very quickly, which is the problem, like Marilyn just said. So, like none of that was getting digested. So that was the problem. By the time I got to the second half of the bike, there was like practically nothing in me, and I didn't realize that. So she switched me right away to getting my a lot of my calories in through bottles. I'm using this. I mean, you can use whatever works for your body. I'm using the Scratch high carb because there's a bunch of stuff I can't take in. I used to have like a lot of gut issues, and I cleaned that up through lots of different work with stuff. So now I'm getting that in, and it's like Marilyn and I both saw in my training, it's like a completely different thing. Like even short rides, longer rides, it's just like, it just feels completely different. I'm able to hit different numbers. It's pretty awesome. So is that kind of what you meant, Marilyn? Unlike,
yeah. And it's just nice, to have, like, we're already talking about these things, but your own personal experience of making those changes. And we think, if you're eating those bars and stuff like that, it's an easy mistake to make because you think, well, I'm eating, so why am I bonking?
Yeah,
right?
I thought it was a lot of calories, but
Yeah, and I've even seen athletes try where they think, okay, well, I'm just gonna have those like almond butter packs and nut butter packs and water, and they think, well, that I'm gonna fuel with just pure fat, and that is gonna be a way. Remember that endurance sports, it is a carbohydrate energy system. It is, just think about it as if you have a vehicle and it needs fuel, right? And it needs gas. And you're not going to go ahead and put vinegar in your car and expect it to start, right? Or you're not going to throw mud in there. You're not going to like go up to a gas station and put mud in there and think that it's going to run. Or a perfect example is a car and it's not a diesel vehicle and you put diesel in it. It's not going to run, right? So when you're doing endurance sports, again, keep it really clean and simple. You need fluid, you need salt, and you need sugar, right? Those are the things, and it needs to be easily digested under stress. Stress can be intensity, it can be heat, it can be nerves, it can be pressure, anything like that. So that whenever you default to anything, that's where your mind should be going. And then all of the extras are based on what you can handle and what you need, and you've trained it and you know it really well. And that goes to the one of the last things I wanted to just briefly touch is the caffeine idea. Okay, now caffeine in our long races or even in our short races, it can be really useful and really helpful. Again, you need to know that your stomach can handle that. So if you do incorporate caffeine into your race plan, it's typically best to wait until the back half or that second half of your race. Taking it early on can sometimes cause a little bit of an issue of some ups and downs. Now, if you're used to that, then that can be okay, but I really recommend that be in the back half of the race. So whether that you start that in the back half of your bike or the back half of the run, caffeine can come in forms of, it can be an ingredient that you include in your sports drink. I know Infinite, it's something that you can include. A lot of gels, you can take note, does it have caffeine or does it not have caffeine? You can look and say, okay, I'll save my caffeinated ones for later in the race. A lot of race courses have Coke or Red Bull on the course. That might be something that you use on the back half of the run. I find, again, little and often with those, if you're, in an amount that you can handle. If you have GI distress, again, keep it clean and simple. Caffeine can cause some of the trots, right? So if you're not used to it and you have a sensitive stomach, you're probably better off to stay away from that stuff. If you've got a stomach of steel and it's going to help you, in the back half of your race, little and often, some of those caffeine gels, Coke at the aid station, grab a water, Coke, water as you go through. That can be helpful in the back half of a marathon. It can kind of save you. It's got a ton of sugar and caffeine and get you through that back half of the marathon. So if you know that you can handle that and you've practiced that, that can be helpful. So, but again, we're always going to go back to those basics and that foundation that hey, if I keep it simple, little, and often, I'm probably going to be okay. Right. And there's the little things to look for. If you are getting really, really, if you're getting really, really cranky and emotional and your speed or your power is really dropping and your heart rate's starting to go up, things to check on. Am I getting enough calories? I always like to think about when you're getting like that, like think of that old Snickers ad. Remember the Snickers ad where the big burly guy turns into like this really high demand whining person, and then they're like, here, have a Snickers, and he changes. So anyways, it turns into a happy person. Think of the Snickers ad. You want to check in with if your mood starts to change, if your power starts to drop, if your heart rate starts to elevate, if you start to get goosebumps, if you can do things looking around at the people on the course. If you're starting to get those goosebumps and it's hot out, you need some salt. Okay. If you're getting really, really blurry eyed and you've got enough calories on board, you probably need some salt. If you're getting really moody and pace and everything's starting to drop, you likely need some calories. Okay. So those are good things to think about. If your heart rate is getting higher and higher and higher and it's hot out, you likely need more fluids. If you've got really bad GI distress, it's likely that you need more fluids and to back off your intensity. Okay, so these are really good rules of thumb. And I've written about all these in some of the articles that I've written. So again, I'll post these in the WhatsApp along with the presentation that was done in Bloomington for us to have to refer back to and play with as you plan your nutrition for the year. So, all right, I've had you guys here an hour, and any last minute burning desire questions that are popping up for people that we can touch on quickly at the end here? Yeah, Michael? Oh, we can't hear you.
So is it reasonable to assume that, like, would this be a good goal to have a nutrition plan per distance race that is kind of your base go-to, and then depending on weather conditions, but tweak it? I mean, so like let's say I've done 100 races, 15 of them were like spot on, perfectly fueled. You take that experience to the next race. Oh, didn't work then. I'm like, whoa. And so I probably stupid. I throw out the whole thing and kind of restart, instead of maybe going back to the baseline and then well, where did I tweak it poorly, or is it like, do the pros have this is what I do every time? And
no, you're exactly right. Having that baseline plan, like my good friend Justin Dare, he did something like 50 Ironmans, and he said he never used the exact same nutrition for any single race he ever did. And I was kind of the same, it's like you have that baseline of what you use, and then you have the knowledge of what you know what to look for. Like I just gave you some of those examples, like blurry eyes, goose pimples, heart rate rising, power dropping. Like if you know some of the signs, then you want to be able to adapt on the fly. So you have that sort of, your baseline of what you know works for you from training. But then, if it's really cold out and you feel like you're working really hard and you're ripping through the calories and you're starting to bonk, you don't want to just be locked into like, nope, this is all I'm going to have. You want to troubleshoot on the fly. Like, oh man, I need to start to get some calories into me. Or if you're GI starts to go and holy man, like I am hitting the porta potty every mile here, then you've got to troubleshoot there. You got to start getting maybe just some straight up sugar in you to keep the energy and the blood sugar up. You've got to get some more fluids in you. You've got to bring the intensity way down, let your GI settle down, and then carry on again. So being able, yes, exactly, have that baseline that you practice, keep record of how it works out in races, in training, in different environments, and then have the knowledge to know when to troubleshoot on the fly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then one tip that's helped save my race numerous times, and I don't know if this is good or bad advice, but it's worked for me numerous times. So I always carry 4 or 5 Tums with me, and if the stomach starts to go south, I 2 or 3 of those, and it feels like has literally saved the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things like that. Those are really good little tips for sure. And, in almost all cases, we're all fit enough when we go into races. So like I said, when your fitness level is a little lower and it's lower, you got to fuel more, right? At early season, we got to fuel more than we do late season, and our fitness is higher. So if you're in that, you're like, oh, my fitness is a little lower and I'm going to bite off more than I can chew in this race. Well, adjust your nutrition plan according to that kind of thing. I just totally lost what I was going to say there. But yeah, so knowing, really knowing what your baseline is and being able to adjust and adapt as you go is super important for sure. Jenny, you wanted to say something there.
Well, I was just going to say that, and it's not only adapting, because of the race conditions that you're anticipating in the day, but like that year that my shifting out in Kona, and I had to single speed the Queen K for 80 some miles. I just blew my legs to smithereens just trying to get up, up to Hobby and back into the wind. And I just went by my normal fueling plan, which I had dialed in pretty well for normal conditions, but I had to work so much harder on the bike that day because I only had one gear that then my run was just a death march. It was just miserable. And it was because I was drastically underfueled because I just didn't think about that. And so, and that's,
I remember, yeah, exactly. Adapting on the fly. I remember what I was just about to say. You prompted me there is that almost any troubleshooting that you need to do can be resolved by just bringing the intensity way down for a few minutes, letting everything settle down, and then ramping back up slowly as you go. So in any race scenario, if you need to just stop at an aid station for a second, cool down if it's a hot race, get ice on you, get water on you, get some fluids in you, get a little bit of nutrition sorted if you need to, and then start back slowly. In most cases, if we just bring the intensity way back for a minute and let everything settle, you can reboot and get going again. That's in most cases. So always keep that in mind as well. And yeah, just adapting on the fly like you did, okay, man, I've had to work a heck of a lot harder than I planned for. I better adjust a little bit here.
Well, my problem was I didn't,
what's that?
I didn't adjust, and that was my problem.
Lesson learned. Yeah.
Yeah.
All righty, team. I've kept you guys here long enough. I really appreciate your time. I know it's a huge topic, so let's continue the conversation in the WhatsApp. Kirsten, I think I saw you type in there that you can provide a cheat sheet in the WhatsApp. So, I'll share the information that I said I was going to. Anyone who's willing to share some of their information, Ginny, your probiotics that are helpful and experiences you've had. I love it when we all are experienced athletes who come to the table with some great information. So, rely on me for sure, but let's rely, as always, I encourage you to rely on each other. You all come to the table with some really good experience and some good knowledge. So learn from each other as well. And so feel free to throw what you know in that group chat, because that's only going to help make us all better. So really appreciate you guys, appreciate your time. And yeah, let's start practicing this stuff so that by the time we hit the courses running this spring, we've got it dialed in. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.